Hello and welcome to Economic Forum, where we discuss various issues affecting our economy in Zimbabwe. There can be issues to do with human capital, to do with tourism, to do with agriculture, to do with education and even religion. But what we look at is how do these issues that would have brought affect our economy and even our business, because many sectors, even if they are not under the commercial umbrella, they also affect a business. My name is John Masuku. Languages are very important in our day-to-day communication, and there are many languages that we have in Zimbabwe, and there are 16 officially recognized ones under the constitution, and there is room for more to be added. And today we are going to be talking about the importance of languages. Government established the National Languages Advisory Committee, NALAC, with the intention of redefining the role of Zimbabwe's indigenous languages in achieving an upper middle income society by the year 2030. Today we are joined by Professor Wiseman Magwa, who is a professor of language education, who is going to be telling us about the importance of languages in economic and business development. In many cases, we discuss our business in English, but we have seen in other countries that they make use of their national languages, their indigenous languages, in a much more formal way, and it gives everyone comfort in participating in the business. Professor Magwa, welcome to Economic Forum.
Thank you, John.
Yes. Now, let's look at the National Languages Advisory Committee as to what is its mandate and how then do you place this discussion, as we have already noted that you also have a task under NDS 1 to help the country sail through in developing its economy.
I think it's important to note that the government has seen it fit to establish a National Languages Advisory Committee. It's not a board, it's just a committee whose mandate is clearly spelled out, that it's there to advise the government in terms of language matters, in terms of language issues. So in that advisory capacity, the committee is not into operations of language activities, but to advise different government agents or departments, different institutes, different players in the language scenario, so that we achieve the goals of NDS 1. But I think it's important to give a context and a clear background of the linguistic scenario at the global, continental, so that we place what we are doing in Zimbabwe in the proper context. At the global level, was in 1996 where we have the Barcelona Declaration of Languages in Spain at the University of Barcelona. These are United Nations conventions where the entire world, they have seen the importance of languages in developing all economies of the world, not only for Zimbabwe, but all economies of the world. The people who had converged at that particular summit agreed that linguistic rights should be observed in all nations so that people can participate meaningfully in the development of their nation. So that Barcelona Convention is the one which guides all nations of the world to develop their language policies, to develop their economies by way of making people participate in development projects. So, as you know, I'm sure we all know that the United Nations has set aside a whole decade, 2022 to 2032, as a decade for indigenous languages. And this is the opportune time for even Zimbabwe now to also have programs to fully develop and to fully use and promote the languages, the indigenous language, so that people can participate in the economic development of our country. Not only that, but in 2019, again, the United Nations set aside the year 2019 to be the year of indigenous languages. So these are conventions, declarations at the global level, so that at least we now place ourselves accordingly. And then at the continental level, the African Union converged here. Fortunately, they converged here in Zimbabwe in 1997 and came up with what we call the Harare Declaration. It was an intergovernmental conference for language experts and language and ministers of governments to map the way forward and to make use of indigenous languages in the economic development of our countries. So this is very important, John, in that language is the center, is at the center of the development of any nation world over. It is only in Africa where it is now impossible for us to use, but it was a colonial agenda. Because if we were to use our languages, the languages that you use to dream, the languages the mother tongues that we use in our dreams, these are the languages for invention, these are the languages for innovation, these are the languages for industrialization. So how do you industrialize and innovate using other people's languages? We might really think we are doing a lot by using colonial languages, but I don't think we'll achieve the goals of NDS1 and the vision 2030 for Zimbabwe.
Well, that's Professor Wiseman Magwa, who is our guest today. He is a professor of language education. And today we are discussing the importance of our languages, all our indigenous languages in Zimbabwe, in promoting business and economic development. And as he said, theirs is just an advisory committee that advises government, and that work has to be done at various institutions and organizations. So join us in the second segment of Economic Forum. Well, what we've learned is that globally, local languages or indigenous languages are used to a great extent. Professor Magwa, our guest here, has just told us in Europe, in Asia, Latin America, and other parts of the world, the use of national languages or indigenous languages is very high. Welcome to the second segment of Economic Forum with our guest, Professor Wiseman Magwa. You've given us the broader context.
Yes.
And now let's come to Zimbabwe as to what you are actually doing as the advisory committee. Some of the concrete things that you have actually achieved or not achieved, but working towards achieving them.
Yeah, well, some work in progress. But thank you very much. Viewers, I think you will be interested to know that the advisory committee, as I indicated earlier on, that their role is to advise the different organizations and ministries in terms of how languages can be used to develop Zimbabwe. So there is a lot that is happening. But of importance, I think, is the recent arrangement or advice which was given to the government through the Minister of then Youth, Sport and Recreation for all stakeholders to assemble at the Victoria. There was a great indawa at the Victoria Falls where the President himself, His Excellency Dr. Idim Mnangagwa, officiated and officially opened the conference. And it is where a clear program and a clear plan of action was developed and presented, which we are now trying to implement. So it is at that conference, the Victoria Falls conference, where it was agreed that the nation is supposed to come up with a national languages policy, which work is being done currently.
Are we amending an old one? Because there have been discussions for a long time, or it was not?
Unfortunately, we don't have a national language policy. It's being implied. Currently, we are only making, the only legislation that is available is the Constitution. So it's unfortunate Zimbabwe is lagging behind as a nation in terms of developing its own national language policy. The national language policy for this country is being referred to in different sections and departments of ministries. Like in the education, Ministry of Education, there is an Education Act which has been amended, I think, in 1986, 1990, 2006, to now include clauses where indigenous languages can be used as medium of instruction in the schools. But we are yet to come up with a comprehensive national language policy for Zimbabwe. So that's one task which is currently being carried out, which is, I think, a tangible output of the advice coming from the National Language Advisory Committee. The second thing that came out at that big conference was also the development of a languages bill, which a bill, you know, will turn out to become an act of parliament later on. And so far, the National Language Advisory Committee has worked or collaborated with the line ministry to develop bill principles, because for every bill there must be principles. So those principles were developed, and now the principles have been approved by cabinet, and they've been sent also to parliament. They've been approved. What remains now for the people to go out and collect information so that we come out with a bill which will be presented to parliament. And then there must also be a national languages board which will take over from this National Languages Advisory Committee, because the committee will only exist until the time when the government would have established a
it's
national
like a steering committee of some sort, or an interim committee.
It's an interim committee.
Yes.
Yeah. So once the board has been established, then it is the board which will now be working or liaising with the different government departments. Now, coming on to the other concrete achievements, I would say we'll start with the Ministry of Information, for example. In liaison with the National Language Advisory Board, we have a viable national FM. It's a radio station which I think is very popular, where all the languages are being broadcasted. And I think it's a very popular station. That's one big achievement. And we have heard of the community radios. The community radios, they are all over the show now. In Shangan, they now have their community radio. In Tonga, those who speak Tonga, they now have their community radio. There's one in Beitbridge for the Venda, Ndao. So these community radios are being developed so that people can now appreciate and promote the use of their local languages.
Especially
because
in
it's a basic human right, yes.
Especially in their day-to-day activities.
Yes.
Which also include business activities.
Business activities, so that they can participate meaningfully in those businesses. Because you cannot, a good example is that you can't participate meaningfully in any development project when you are using a foreign language. I just want to give you an example in Shona. I know you speak English, but I will ask you to translate. I don't know whether I will be able to translate. If I say in Shona, Akatik Paku, Togo, Mdenga ndiye B, Rikiti, Fau Fau Z, can that be translated in English? I'm sure it will be very difficult. Or another good example is Musikana Oichigagairwa, Chinokufamba Kunenge Kukayura Nyimu. No English expert will be able to translate this and come up with the exact meaning. So we are saying we lose a lot when we use other people's languages. And this is why it will be very difficult for people to innovate or to invent using a borrowed language. So, and as I indicated earlier on, world over, the norm is for people to use their own local languages for development purposes.
That's Professor Wiseman Magwa, who is our guest today, and we're talking about the importance of indigenous languages, particularly in the promotion of our business and economic activities. Quite a lot of examples there, including those tongue twisters, which I have to sit down and translate. But join us in the third segment of Economic Forum with Professor Wiseman Magwa. We're now in the third and final segment of Economic Forum, where today we are discussing national or indigenous languages, how they affect business. And our guest here is Professor Wiseman Magwa, who is a professor of language education, but also a member of the National Languages Advisory Committee. And as he clearly said, that theirs is a committee of experts which just advises different institutions on how to promote languages. And we're focusing mainly on how we can promote business activities using our own languages. Now, probably you have an example, of you're meeting an old lady who cannot express herself in English, but she just expressed herself in a very moving way in Shona, and you sort of discourage her by maybe not recognizing that. What example do you have?
Oh, yes. Actually, these are the people, the majority of the people, they speak their local languages.
Yes.
And when you want to do business with them in a foreign language, actually they will not be able to express themselves fully. That old lady that we are making reference to might want to say, ndiri kutengesa zapatira renzungu, ndoda kuwana musho wemari. And then the question is, how would someone clearly translate and come up with an equivalent in English?
Yes. And also preserve that beauty of our... Now, this is just an example. It can be said in any of our indigenous languages.
Yes.
But what you are just expressing here, Professor, is that those are the things that we would want to preserve when doing business, just like we say in English.
Maybe what viewers might want to know is the fact that indigenous languages, the beauty of indigenous languages is that we can clearly express ourselves using idiophones. Idiophones which are not prevalent in the other European languages. This is why you find it is very difficult for translators to come up with correct translations of the indigenous languages versions.
I mean, most of us would remember, even when you go to Renkini in Makokoba, those gentlemen would say, Itobi, Amapera, Yetelele Pela. The way it is said.
Can you do it in English? Never. It's not. You will not achieve the same.
But it's important. People actually, keep that. It's captivating and so forth.
Oh,
and it's something that we should actually promote in our business languages. But let's go on to how you are working with these institutions, educational institutions, right from primary school, going to secondary school, tertiary institutions. That is very important. How are you deploying yourself?
Yes. Most of the tertiary institutions like universities and colleges, they are working hand in glove with the National Language Advisory Committee in promoting the use and research in indigenous languages. Maybe I will start with the Midland State University, where there is a National Language Institute which was commissioned by the President. This is the institute so far which has done a lot for this country. The Constitution of Zimbabwe, which is the supreme law of the nation, was translated into all the officially recognized languages of the nation, including sign language. And this work was done by the National Language Institute at the Midland State.
And we also have the institute that was at the University of Zimbabwe, which worked very hard on coming up with the Shona and developing dictionary.
That's the African Languages Research Institute at the University of Zimbabwe, which did a lot of good work. Then it was being, I think, headed by Professor Chimundu.
We have the developing done by Samuel Hatebe.
Yeah.
Yes.
So they managed to produce dictionaries in Shona and Ndebele, and they were in the process of developing more dictionaries in other indigenous languages.
For music.
Yeah. The medical dictionary, they now have it. Music dictionary is there. The literature dictionary is now there. So a lot is happening. And the Department of African Languages at the University of Zimbabwe, I'm sure they are pursuing other development projects in terms of languages. We also have Great Zimbabwe University, where the local languages, Venda, Tonga, Nambia, they are now being taught as subjects at the university level for degree purposes, so that people can go now and teach these languages so that they don't die. Because if we don't do this, the reason why I talked of the decade of indigenous languages 2022 to 2032 is to make sure that nations preserve these languages. So Zimbabwe is in the process of now teaching these languages so that they don't vanish from the face of this earth. So kudos to Great Zimbabwe University, and not only that, Lupane State University, I think they are doing the same. They are teaching the formerly marginalized languages, particularly in Matabeleland. They are now being taught at degree level. And the colleges, you might want to know is that all our colleges now, it's now policy that all students that register at the teachers college, they must do an indigenous language as part of their curriculum.
Which is over and above the one that they know, that is their home language.
Yeah, it's over and above to help them so that when they are deployed to an area where their mother tongue is not being spoken, they will be able to function.
Yes.
So if someone picks on Kalanga, if they are deployed to a Kalanga speaking community, then they will be able to teach. So these are developments that are taking place in liaison with the ministries and also the national languages.
Also, there will be need for dictionaries and manuals in these indigenous languages to also talk about business and economic issues. And we cannot, leave out a discussion about someone like Dr. Ignatius Mabasa, who actually completed his doctorate,
PhD in indigenous languages.
In indigenous languages. Dr. Mabasa, the author of Mbwemun and other books.
But the unfortunate thing is that it was only another country which realized the importance of carrying out a thesis in indigenous languages. Well, that was done in South Africa. And it's a big challenge to Zimbabwe,
local institutions.
To local institutions. That if South Africans can realize that there is potential in using indigenous languages, what more of the people of Zimbabwe? I think it's a big challenge. We should be doing more as a nation.
Well, Professor Skutamfundo Magwa, and we will ask you just in a few seconds to address, you speak Shona, Ondebele, or Tonga, just to address the nation facing the camera about the importance of indigenous languages, just for 30 seconds.
More Zimbabwe, mutauro ndiwo upenyu, kunzi munhu ndokunge uno mutauro. Ngatishandise mitauro yedu kuti tisimudzire Zimbabwe tive nobudiriro yenyika.
Siyabonga Skutamfundo Magwa ngokubuya lapha kulolu hlelo. Well, that was Professor Wiseman Magwa, who was our guest today. We're discussing the importance of indigenous languages in promoting economic and business development in Zimbabwe, because we have learned from other countries that it can be done in Europe, in Asia, and other continents. They're actually using their languages in order to develop their economies. So what remains is to thank you, Professor Magwa. And if viewers have any questions about some of the issues that we discuss here, including the issues to do with language, they can contact us on the numbers that are showing on your screen. And if you'd like to engage with us, you can also do so on the social media platforms that again are flashing on your screen. If you miss some of the episodes of Economic Forum, you can actually view them on our YouTube channel, which is Economic Forum Zimbabwe. So on behalf of Professor Wiseman Magwa, our guest, and the production crew, this is John Masugu wishing you happy viewing. Sarai Jakanaka, Lisale Bushi.